Hi everybody, and welcome to our online lectures for Chapter 6. Just a few, or at least one, business notes before we continue here. Unlike in class, I am showing you the entire slide here at one time. That's because I'm technologically challenged and can't figure out how to easily record and make things appear in a sequence rather than all at once. So just a suggestion. I would either stop the audio as soon as I'm finished explaining this and write down everything on the slide, or control yourself and don't write down everything on the slide, but go point by point with me. My concern is that I'm going to dive into the content of the slide and you're going to be writing down what's, the next point, the next point, the next point while I'm explaining an earlier point, and you may not get what is it I'm trying to say about that earlier point. So please either stop the audio and write everything down, maybe leaving some space after each bullet, or be sure just to go with me point by point. Okay, so with that said, we are going to be dealing with infant social development in Chapter 6, one of the most, maybe the most important chapter, I think, of the entire semester, and I'm really bummed that it turned out that I was going to be gone while we were covering this, or should be covering it, but I will try to convey some of the importance of this as we go through this online together. So as you see there, I'm actually starting out with just a comment about Erikson, and every time we talk about social development, we will do that. We will start with Erikson's stage or stages that correspond to that life period because they often set the tone for some of the research that comes later. All right, so just to refresh your memory about Erikson, he is a psychodynamic theorist, and so he's kind of in the Freudian tradition. And you might remember that his stages are a series of conflicts, and you kind of see that here, I think. His stages are also very intimately linked to Freud's stages, and I hope that will become clear as we go through them. All right, so the first stage that Erikson talks about is trust versus mistrust. And he believes that this lasts about the first year of life. B means birth, right? So birth to one. And it's not a coincidence that that is also the span of Freud's first stage. Erikson takes Freud's ideas, he incorporates them into his theory, but he builds on them. All right, so the main conflict, as you can see, is trust versus mistrust. Erikson believes that the baby in the first year of life is kind of like a sensitive period, if you will, for gathering information about whether or not the world is a reliable place. Okay, sensitive time for gathering information about whether or not the world is a reliable place. Can I count on the world? Can the people in the world be trusted to meet my needs, to follow through? Okay. And of course, one of the main ways that we help babies establish trust, and this is where Freud kind of comes in, is with feeding, and meeting their nutritional needs, and also, allowing them to chew stuff that's only appropriate for them to chew on and not get, not be dangerous or what have you. So Erikson does use Freud, but he expands on it. His idea of trust incorporates the oral stage, but goes much beyond it. It's a much more psychological and social concept rather than just kind of this physical idea of satisfying oral needs. One thing I'd like to say about Erikson's stages in general is that good resolution, healthy resolution of the crisis does not mean that you are entirely at the positive end of things. You can consider trust versus mistrust to be, a continuum. And ideally, we probably have, more trust than mistrust. But, let's be honest, to be 100% trusting all the time would probably be pretty dangerous. And so a little bit of mistrust is not a bad thing. Okay, so the way Erikson says that we promote trust in children is to meet their needs, to respond when they are sending us signals, crying, what have you, and to be a loving, safe presence for the child. His next stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. It's kind of like a toddler stage, and it roughly corresponds to Freud's anal stage. Autonomy, as you guys probably know, is independence, right? Shame is, in psychological circles at least, is a pervasive sense of being a bad person. Okay, so it's more of a kind of a self-concept issue, a pervasive sense of being a bad person, whereas doubt is very specific. It's in this particular situation, I don't think I can do what's needed to succeed. Okay, I don't think I can follow through. All right, so between 1 and 3, Erikson thinks that the toddler is, battling, if you will, or has a special kind of desire to gain information about whether they can be autonomous and independent, or are they incapable, basically. And if so, they experience shame and doubt. You probably are not surprised that autonomy is a main theme of this stage. If you think about some of the things that toddlers are famous for saying, like no or mine, right? Those are all both ways of saying, here's my will. I want to enforce my will. Okay. We're not going to talk much about autonomy versus shame and doubt. Your textbook has a section on this, on autonomy and gaining independence and things like that. We're going to focus more on trust versus mistrust. And in particular, we're going to pick up a modern kind of version of trust, if you will, and look at the issue of attachment. Now, you see the equal sign there is kind of a squiggly sign, meaning they're roughly equivalent, right? They're not exactly the same thing necessarily, but they're very close. And so, although Erikson does not talk about attachment, the entire literature on attachment, and believe me, there is a ton, is relevant to this issue of a child establishing trust. All right, so the rest of our time in our discussion of infant social development will mostly be geared towards the topic of attachment. Let's move on. Okay, so let's define what it is we're talking about by the concept of attachment. You can think of attachment as a bond, and in best case scenario, of course, it is a strong bond between an infant and one or maybe a small number of adults that develops during the first year of the baby's life. And I want to emphasize that this bond occurs really on all levels of the infant. We're going to be focusing a lot on behavior, the infant's behavior, because that's what much of the early decades of attachment work focused on. And we have the most information about it. But now that we can do brain imaging and things like that for the last couple of decades, we are also coming to see that this bond is not just behavioral, it's not just emotional, but really it's also physiological. In other words, a baby's brain literally develops differently if the bond between them and the parents or the caretakers is strong and developing in a healthy way than if it's developing in a less healthy way. So this bond is really multidimensional in that way. Physiological, emotional, behavioral, cognitive, pretty much any aspect of human functioning you want to throw in. I think it probably can be incorporated into attachment. Okay, so when a child comes into the world, often the parents do feel fairly attached. Research suggests mom might feel that a bit more on average than dad. And again, for mom, that is not just an emotional thing, it's also a physiological thing for dad as well. For the baby, although they tend to show like recognition and preferences for their parents' voices and things like that, if you want to talk about like an emotional and physiological bond, that's actually going to take, depending on what your criterion is, probably a couple of months, maybe even the better part of the first year to develop. Okay, so that means, of course, that intervening factors, parenting skills, nutrition, other experiences may alter the way the attachment is developing for the child. And we're going to explore some of those variables a little bit later on in this lecture. Let's move on. All right, let's define at least some of the behavioral signs of how this attachment develops over the first year of life, or 2 years. the main developments happen in the first year or so, but of course there are can be changes after that. And I emphasize that these are behavioral stages. What this means is this is what the baby's behavior is telling us. And again, we've known this for quite some time, this kind of step-by-step model we're going to look at. Why I'm emphasizing that is if you were to look at the baby's neurological development, again, you would start to see changes happening in the way the nervous system is developed earlier than 2 months. In relation to how the child is being parented. Are they in a safe environment that provides all their needs? Are they in a chaotic environment? Are they being abused, God forbid? Neurology often, probably, I think always, precedes behavior. And so we'll keep in mind that these behavioral stages are just that. It's only tracing how behavior changes over time, what adults would see, basically. All right, so the first stage, or the first step, I guess you might say, includes approximately the first 2 months of life, where the child doesn't really seem to have overt or obvious preferences for any particular adult. So we can call that the stage or the phase of indiscriminate sociability. You take a 2-week-old baby and you as mom hold them, they're, probably going to be fairly happy. You put them in Uncle Bill's arms for the first time, they're probably also going to be fairly happy. So as long as they're being taken care of, their behavior at least doesn't seem to show particular preferences, or particular attachments. That begins to change as a child kind of moves into their 3rd month. So from 2 to 7 months or so, it's kind of like the window is narrowing, if you will. They prefer a limited number of people, usually those people who are their primary caretakers. And so if you want to find the most happy, relaxed behavior, you usually will look for the child to be in mom's arms or dad's arms. They still often will tolerate other people. It's just that they'll be a little bit more kind of reserved, if you will. You get, kind of that facial expression where kind of the eyebrows go down and it's kind of like they're really concentrating or they're not quite sure what's going on with this Uncle Bill who's holding that I haven't seen in months. But it's not like they have full-blown, tantrums or breakdowns when they're handed off to Uncle Bill. Okay, that changes as the child starts to push towards 1 year. In other words, as they pass 6 months and enter the last half of the first year of life, maybe around 6, 7, 8 months, we are in the phase of what we might call specific attachment. And in this phase, the child has very clear-cut preferences for one or just a small number of people. And so usually that's mom, dad, maybe a daycare provider or something like that. And we're going to talk in some detail about how we know a specific attachment is present. So I'll put that off until the next slide. Starting around 24 months or so, we see the decline of attachment-related anxiety. So if in the previous phase, a child shows certain signs, which we'll talk about, that they are attached to a certain person and they don't want to be with these other people, the nursery provider at church, the babysitter they've never met, often in stage 3 from 7 to 24 months, they protest a lot when those strangers show up. But after about 2 years or so, it's not that kids stop being attached, and it's not they are not experiencing any anxiety if a stranger approaches them, but they learn how to deal with it better. Okay, and so you see the decline of attachment-related anxiety as kids move into what we might call the preschool phase. All right, on this slide, you notice we have some links to some videos, and I guess probably what's best is let me explain the concept that each of the main bullet points has, and then after I explain the first one, separation anxiety, I'd encourage you to watch the video for that, and then the same after I talk about stranger anxiety. Okay, so when we are looking at the specific attachment phase, right, that third from the previous slide, the most obvious behaviors associated with it are separation and stranger anxiety. Okay, so separation anxiety happens when a child is, as the name suggests, separated from somebody that they are attached to. And it can be pretty darn painful. It might involve lots of tears and, throwing yourself on the floor and having a full-blown meltdown. This is not a behavior, from 8 months to 2.5 years or so. So although it's distressing for the child, obviously, and it can be very distressing for parents, it's actually something that's really normal. And depending on how the child recovers from that bout of anxiety, we would even say it could be positive. Okay, well, what do I mean by how the child recovers from the bout of anxiety? What I'd like you to do in just a minute is take the video. And this is a video shot down actually just south of here at Illinois State. And you've got a young woman in the video who I assume is a graduate assistant down there of Laura Burke's, and a little boy who's just toddling around, and his dad is there. And right at the beginning of the clip, his dad is going to walk out of the room, and you'll see how upset he is, and you'll see how little the young woman can do to calm the kid down. Okay, but then dad's going to come back, and I want you to watch the little boy when his dad comes back and see how he recovers from the separation with his dad. The kind of recovery we see is exactly what we want to see. It predicts many blessings down the road. You'll see this little boy, his dad picks him up. It's like someone flips a switch. He stops crying, he melts into his father, and he's a happy camper again. Okay, when we see a reunion like that after a separation, even though the separation anxiety might be extreme, we know from lots and lots of research that as that child grows, that probably the relationship with parents is going to be strong. Probably, well, actually, some of the outcomes of attachment we'll talk about a little bit later on. So please watch the video and pay attention to those things I've mentioned. Okay, let's move on to stranger anxiety. Stranger anxiety, as the name suggests, is feeling very uncomfortable around people you don't know, excuse me, or people that you don't often see. And this can be even if you've got your attachment figure, mom or dad, there. All right, it certainly is the case if mom and dad have left. Maybe they've left you with a babysitter you don't know or something. But, even if you're home with mom and the UPS man comes to the door, often little kids are hiding behind mom or, running to the other room or what have you. During this specific attachment phase, it's not unusual and actually considered normal and maybe even healthy for a child to withdraw from strangers. In the video clip, you'll see a little boy, different little boy, whose mother remains with him, next to him, but she seats him in the lap of the same young woman who is in the first video. And that young woman won't let him go, so you'll see kind of what his way is of making sure that he lets her know his preference is for being with mom. Why don't you take a look at that now? Before we go through the content on this slide, let me just add something that I should have said on the previous slide. Although these anxieties, right, stranger and separation anxiety, again, are really uncomfortable for everybody involved, they do seem to be adaptive. They do seem to be a part of normal development. Kids, the cross-cultural consistency of attachment is pretty strong. So, we're probably tapping into something universal here. Attachment, by the way, is one of the models that partially, as we'll see, is evolutionary in nature. And therefore, there is kind of an emphasis on the survival value of these behaviors. And I think you can see how for a kid who's, a year old, year and a half old, it would be probably of survival value to stick by those that you're familiar with and to avoid strangers. So anyway, just wanted to add that. All right, so on this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about why attachment happens. And different people are going to answer that from different points of view, kind of almost interpreting the question differently. The first person I'd like to talk about is John Bowlby. Okay, not John Bowling, he's our president, but John Bowlby. John Bowlby was a British psychiatrist who had been, I was going to say raised, that's not the right word, trained, I guess you might say, in a psychoanalytic or Freudian approach. And so he's coming at this as kind of a psychodynamically oriented person. But you're going to see here that he also integrates an evolutionary perspective. And he was the one who really popularized the idea of attachment. He did a lot of research during the Second World War in England on kids who were separated from parents and so forth, and wrote several books that really got the field started in many ways. Anyway, he believed that this process is a part of our species. Actually, it seems to be a part of several primate species, and probably not just primates, other mammals as well. And he proposed, and there's some logic to this, I suppose, that going through this process of attachment helps babies thrive. And we've already basically just addressed why that might be the case, or how that might be the case. Okay. Another person who addressed why attachment happens, really almost more from the perspective of how attachment happens, is a psychologist named Harry Harlow, who was at the University of Wisconsin and did his work probably around the same time as John Bowlby, kind of the middle of last century. And Harlow, if you've had Intro to Psych, you might actually remember, if not his name, his research. He was the guy who separated baby monkeys from their moms and raised them in a cage with two different, what would you call them, foster moms, but they weren't alive, right? They were just structures. And one of the little kind of fake foster moms was cozy. They were covered with fur and you can cuddle with them. And the other one in the baby's cage was a wire figure, so not very comfortable, but it had a baby bottle filled with milk, so it was pretty important too. If you don't recall seeing clips of those baby monkeys in your Intro to Psych class, and some of you may not have even been through Intro to Psych, not to worry. The first day I'm back, I'm going to show you a video clip that has some of Harlow's work in it, so we'll see it. I think it's also discussed in your textbook, if I'm remembering correctly. In any case, Harlow's work was really important because when the babies were stressed, they ran to the fuzzy mom rather than the mom with the bottle. And that's really important because at the time Harlow was doing his work, Freudian ideas were pretty prominent, and that, of course, involved the importance of feeding, the importance of oral satisfaction that the child got from mother. And Harlow's work really suggested that actually it wasn't the feeding per se that was important, but having this kind of comforting, soothing physical contact with a parental figure that really promoted the attachment. Okay. And this also points to another important part of attachment, and that's using the parent as a safe base and a security blanket, if you will. So when you're stressed, the thing we look at in attachment behavior is, does the child turn to the parent when they're stressed? And we'll see some of that in a video in a little bit. Okay, and then finally, Jean Piaget, although he's most well known for his work on cognitive development, does have something to say about this. It's interesting that his work on object permanence, and he's assessing kind of object permanence very behaviorally. He's not looking at facial expressions or gaze time. He's looking at, more, and we might say, gross behavior, large movements where the child reaches for things, right? And in his model, object permanence sets in right about the same time that specific attachment develops. And that may be a coincidence, but it may not be a coincidence. It may be that object permanence, right, knowing that something, or in this case someone, still exists even when they've disappeared from your field of vision, object permanence may allow the baby to understand that the caretaker is still present, and in situations of separation, then engage in behavior to try and get the caretaker to come back. Okay, so we have an evolutionary perspective here. We've got a kind of physiological and physical calming perspective. We've also got kind of a cognitive perspective here, multidimensional approach to how and why attachment happens. Let's move on to a discussion of the different kinds of attachments that seem to exist. All right, now let's take a look at what kinds of attachment can develop between the child and the caretaker. Attachment develops down one of several pathways. So there's different kinds of ways that attachment takes. And typically, at least in the first couple of years of life, we assess attachment by what we call the strange situation. And after I go through these different types of attachment, the video will actually show you a strange situation. Basically, it is a series of separations and reunions between the child and the parent, and also involves the introduction of a stranger to the child. So actually you saw something, was kind of part of that in the earlier video with the little boy whose dad walked out of the room and then came back in. So you'll see that happening in the video too. There are certain behaviors that we look for in the child. In particular, we look for information about how the separations and reunions go. We look at their reaction to the stranger, whether or not they can be supported by the stranger. We also look at their exploratory behavior. In other words, when, if at all, is the child open to exploring this new environment they're in? Usually the strange situation is done in a clinic or a university lab or something like that. Okay, what we hope to find is what we call a secure attachment, and most babies are securely attached. In our culture, I think it's 70% or so get this label, if you will. And what happens in the strange situation with a securely attached baby is we see the separation anxiety, and we also see the child being very easily soothed by the reunion with the parent. We see them exploring when the parent is around, so clearly they feel safe. That the parent can be used as kind of a safe base from which to explore, and they also tend to be wary of the stranger, especially when the parent is not around. There are other kinds of attachment that sometimes we lump together and call insecure attachment, but we can actually break that down into 3 different kinds. The first of these is avoidant. Children with an avoidant attachment, as the name suggests, don't seem to have a strong connection with their parent. They will explore, don't seem to have problems with exploring, but they don't seem particularly upset when the parent leaves or particularly interested when the parent comes back. They're not particularly interested in the stranger either, and may be actually kind of scared of the stranger. The next kind, the ambivalent attachment style, or the resistant attachment style, depending on what model you look at, there's different language in there. Basically, the child with this kind of style we might call clingy. It's kind of a good synonym for it. The child who has an ambivalent attachment style will not explore. That's one of the hallmarks. They will not explore when the parent is present. So it seems like they don't trust the parent will be there for them to protect them, or be that safe base if the exploration gets a little out of hand. They are very upset by the separation, but they are not easily comforted by the reunion. They may, approach the parent when the parent comes back, put up their hands as if they wish to be held, and then the parent picks them up and maybe they start to scream louder or even hit the parent. You may know that the word ambivalent means 2 different extremes, and in that example you see those 2 extremes, wanting to be picked up and yet being even angry at the parent. They also tend to be fearful of strangers. Both the avoidant and ambivalent styles are fairly predictable. I mean, and what I mean by that is the kid's behavior is fairly predictable. It tends to be pretty consistent from assessment to assessment. And there's a certain kind of logic, if you will. The ambivalent child, the logic there is that, it's kind of clinginess and maybe a lack of trust and anger directed towards the parent. The avoidant style of attachment we still consider to be attachment because, first of all, it's a predictable form of behavior, consistent, and also, even though the child is not necessarily running to the parent when they come back, they might make eye contact. They might watch the parent leave. So it's clear that they're kind of tracking the parent, but they don't necessarily seem to be invested emotionally. And then finally, the last style of attachment is kind of different than the other three, the disorganized style. In this style, there's a lot of unpredictability. I mean, disorganized basically means we're not sure what's going to happen next. You might have a child who, at the beginning of a strange situation, is acting in an ambivalent fashion and later on seems somewhat secure, but then ends up to be avoidant. Often you have these kids playing rather bizarre behaviors too. I mean, so when the parent returns after the separation, you may find the child start to take a few steps towards the parent and then turn around and walk to a corner in the opposite side of the room and sit down. Just kind of really unexpected behavior. Okay, these different styles of attachment are important in that they do predict various things in the future for a child. Kids who have a secure attachment in infancy have a better chance of academic success, success with peers, higher self-esteem. Secure attachment styles tend to predict good things down the road. And likewise, the other three tend to increase the risk of something going wrong for the child, whether it's academically, socially, psychologically, or what have you. So right now, I would encourage you to look at the video, and why don't you go ahead and stop this now, take a look at the video, and then come back to this slide, and I'll add a few other things. Okay, so I guess one thing I wanted to add is that there's a variety of things that play into how a child ends up securely attached, disorganizedly attached. That doesn't sound like a word, but you know what I mean. And one of the things that seems to be most important, although it's by far not the only thing, is how sensitive the parents are, how responsive the parents are to the child's needs. They've done a lot of research on what kind of parenting tends to overlap with these kind of attachment styles. And perhaps not surprisingly, the securely attached child often has a parent who's very responsive, not only, feeds them when they're hungry, changes them when they're wet, but is also, responsive to the child's social cues, and we're going to see that in just a minute on the next. So responsive at all sorts of levels, daily care, emotionally, socially, and just pretty much anything you can think of. Okay, the child who is avoidantly attached has a higher chance of having a parent be at one of two extremes. Either they tend to be kind of standoffish with their child. In other words, the parent doesn't seem to have the emotional connection with the child. Or the parent seems to be, I don't want to say this, the parent seems to violate the boundaries of the child. So you can imagine maybe a baby laying in their crib, and the parent comes in and maybe sticks their face down in the baby's face and does a whole bunch of tickling and loud vocalizing, "Hi baby, boo boo boo," and all this stuff, and the child might be kind of wincing and trying to turn away, basically sending signals that it's too much, and the parent of the avoidant baby basically continues. So it seems that the avoidant attachment style is either a response to not getting a response from the parent, or to trying to protect oneself from overstimulation by the parent. Okay, the ambivalent or resistant attachment style tends to be linked with parenting that is unpredictable. So, sometimes the parent might be appropriate with the child, sometimes they might, not respond to the child, sometimes they might be like, that parent who's doing all the goochie goo stuff and kind of violating the boundaries of the child. And then finally, the disorganized child is often in a situation, maybe not often, but the chances are higher that they're in a very chaotic situation, chaotic emotionally, I should say. Often, the two themes they seem to find in these families are that the parent either behaves in a fearful fashion, in other words, they are like abusing the child, or the parent seems to fear the child, which sounds a little strange, right? I mean, a parent doesn't typically fear their child, but perhaps you can imagine a parent who's so freaked out being a parent and so not sure what to do that they're totally rigid when they're holding their kid, and they kind of look at their child with this face full of fear, and communicate a message to the child basically that there's nobody here to take care of you. You're on your own. In fact, you may even be the stronger one of the two people involved in this relationship. All right, so those are some of the parenting styles that tend to be connected with these 4 styles of attachment. We're now going to move on and talk about some of the other things that might be linked to the kind of attachment that develops. All right, so on this slide and the next, we're going to take a look at a sample of factors that make a contribution to the kind of attachment type or style that the baby develops with caretakers. And we've really kind of already talked about this first one, the adult inputs. The main input that the adult brings to the table is really their level of responsiveness to the baby's cues. And I've put a video clip here of a technique that some have used in research on parent-child relationships. It's called the still face experiment. And I'd like you to take a look at this video in just a sec. Watch how they direct the mother at one point to kind of stop interacting with the baby. I mean, she's still looking at the baby, but her face just goes basically, blank, if you can imagine that. And watch the baby's reaction. And I will tell you that the baby's reaction in this video is not the most extreme that I've seen. There are other videos where babies are just, they're beside themselves, basically. And so this kind of just points to the kind of responsiveness the child is looking for. It's not just about making sure that the child is fed and clean and has a warm place to sleep. They're looking for emotional responsiveness too. So take a look at the video and just see how tuned in the child is to whether or not the mom is attending to her in a positive and emotionally connected way. All right, well, the adult probably brings the most important thing to the table when they are loving and responsive, but the baby also has some input into this relationship, of course. And one thing that has been talked about the most in terms of attachment is the possible impact of the baby's temperament on their attachment style. And temperament is kind of like the building blocks of personality. It includes things like, how generally is the child, how active is the child, are they fairly regular in their patterns like sleeping and eating, and we're pretty sure that this has a strong biological basis, because for some of it, even in the womb, mothers report this kid is like so active, or sometimes there's no pattern to his activity. He'll wake me up at 3 o'clock one morning, and then the next morning, the next day I don't even feel him move. So even in the womb, some of these elements are already clear to especially the mother. There are different models of temperament out there, and your textbook talks about some of the kind of more complex ones with many different dimensions. I think what we're going to do for our purposes is just take a look at really the first one that was developed. And these are not so much dimensions, these are actually like types of temperament. So many kids, I think it's, maybe about 50 or 60%, don't quote me on that though, pretty clearly fall into one of three different categories. The more common category, fortunately, is the easy child. These are the children that you should already be praying that God sends you. As the name suggests, they tend to be happy babies. They tend to be regular babies. They don't, tend to be too sensitive to their surroundings. They're fairly adaptable. That's another aspect of temperament. Does the child deal with like violations of their routine well? Easy kids tend to be pretty adaptable. Okay, and I think you can imagine that it's probably, well, as the name suggests, really pretty easy to parent and bond with such a child. The child, in many ways, makes it easy. Kids who have a difficult temperament are those who are, more, well, sometimes we might call them colicky, right? They tend to cry a lot. They might be really irregular in their patterns, so even after they're born, they're getting mom up at all hours of the night. It takes them a long time to learn to sleep through the night. They tend to not be adaptable. Not sure if I said that. But in any case, as the name suggests, being a parent to one of these children is not always the easiest thing. And the good news is there's evidence that if a parent can, be loving and responsive and not let the child's crankiness and inflexibility get to them, that actually these kids tend to outgrow that difficult temperament, or at least it tends to be really moderated, and often they grow up, with very desirable personalities. So just a little encouragement to you if you end up with a really cranky baby, stick it out, be kind, loving, warm, and in all likelihood you will have a good impact on that kid's personality. All right, but you can imagine if a parent doesn't do that, or that it just takes a lot of extra energy for the parent to be that responsive parent to this child. And then slow to warm kids or slow to warm up kids, these kids tend to be not very emotionally expressive, maybe in some ways maybe somewhat sluggish. And that can be hard for parents too. Not as hard as a difficult child, but to not get that emotional reaction from your baby, the big smile, or the child who cries before you're holding them, but then stops crying when you are holding them. That can be hard, not to get that kind of emotional reinforcement. So that also can be a bit of a challenge for parents. All right, let's move on to a couple other categories of factors that contribute to attachment style. Okay, two more things that we're going to talk about, or two more categories of things, I guess I might say. The first one is the goodness of fit between the baby and the caretaker. Okay, obviously we've talked about how the adult brings something to the table in terms of responsiveness. The infant brings certain things to the table too. Temperament is one of them. And it's not enough to ask, how do each of those things, the adult's responsiveness and the infant's temperament, how do they individually contribute to the relationship? You also have to ask, how well do they fit together? If you think about what we just said about a difficult child or a child with a difficult temperament. A child with a difficult temperament who has a super easygoing parent who doesn't get rattled by, crying babies and is really go with the flow, that's a pretty good fit. That's about the best kind of parent that kid can have. But can you imagine if a baby with a difficult temperament gets an adult who, is really like uptight and frustrated themselves, and is so anxious and depressed over whatever, that they're having a hard time being responsive to their child. That's not a great fit. Okay, so how well what the infant brings fits with whatever the adult is bringing is also a question. It's more a question. It's almost like a mesosystem question, right? In terms, well, no, it's not. Scratch that. But it's a question of the relationship rather than the individual contributors of an infant and the individual contributors of the adult. Okay, and then finally, there's a variety of factors outside the infant-caretaker relationship that really do become kind of meso and exosystem factors to go back to Bronfenbrenner, that filter down and can affect the attachment. So for example, if you have a child who is born and 2 weeks later, the main breadwinner in the family loses their job, okay, that may well create all sorts of stress in the family that ultimately, perhaps through reduced responsiveness on the part of the adults, influences the infant-adult attachment. We have found evidence that the quality of husband-wife relationships affects how well the baby individually attaches to each of his or her parents, right? So I mean, even if both parents are great responsive parents, and yet there's a lot of tension between mom and dad, that tension between mom and dad ultimately can compromise the attachment that the baby has. Okay, that's more of a mesosystem thing. How are these two elements of my microsystem, mom and dad, interacting with one another? Another finding, just kind of FYI, and we may have mentioned this in class, there's evidence that if a mom has a good social support system, like maybe, we got a new mom with a baby and her mother is helping out, and maybe she's got a couple sisters that are helping out and a good friend, that's really important. That helps a lot with reducing mom's stress and allowing her to, spend that quality time with the kid, promoting a good relationship. So probably the most important thing in determining attachment style is the adult's responsiveness, going back to that very first item that we talked about on the last slide. That being said, just like pretty much everything we talk about in this class, the attachment style of a child is really influenced by many different things. As you go on to the second file, we'll be talking about infant daycare, and we'll address, in part, what implications infant daycare has for the attachment between parent and child.